Sterling, my millionaire brother, smirked in front of our entire family during Thanksgiving. Will our little toy colonel continue to pilot those semis? The pastime that the government pays for. My mom merely smiled weakly and remained silent. Next week, he would be required to enter my playground and familiarize himself with its regulations, but he was unaware of this. My name is Sloan Mercer, and at 38 years old, the universe revolves around the deafening rumble of 4 turbine engines. That rumble has transformed into a cries for help as I pilot my C-17 Globemaster III over the Northern California plains, a fierce crosswind cuts across the sky. Descending underneath me, Travis Air Force Base appears like an exact grid of discipline and command, the upkeep of which is my responsibility in this planet. Colonel, the altitude remains unchanged. 30 knots of wind shear. In my headset, I can hear a soothing voice. Imitate that, I respond, my own voice clear and unwavering amidst the background din. As a pilot with thousands of hours under my belt, my green Nonx gloves give me an instinctive feel for the controls. I give the yoke a little push, a tiny adjustment that seems as soft as a whisper to a steel and wire behemoth that weighs 200 tons. Even here on the ground, my crew is keeping a close eye on the plane that is coming our way. Not only is the jet touching down, but so is their commander. I feel the weight of their trust and the responsibility it entails deep within me. Upon this, my word is law. Reason being, lives are at stake. She goes down when I make one last, decisive tweak. A flawlessly executed command is punctuated by the impact of the landing gear hitting the tarmac. An enormous, mutters, finds a comfortable position, and follows instructions. I stepped out onto the tarmac as the California sun warmed my face as I descended from the cockpit. Wow, I'm totally rocking it. Even though I am on the petite side, I feel enormously powerful and disciplined being here in the United States Air Force. I am quite tall. However, the second I enter my clinical, alone office, the emotion dissipates. A fresh email has arrived, as the light on my desktop begins to blink. I feel sick to my stomach from the familiar feeling of chilly dread as I look over the centerline. It's worse than any high I've ever had, wind speed and direction. My brother Cole Stratford is named there. All of a sudden, the flight charts and commendations that grace my office walls feel like a thin veneer. My own family has wounded me more than any armor I wear, my uniform, my status, my unyielding authority. Seeing that name on the screen takes me right back to that painful period in my life, when the wound had never really healed. A Thanksgiving feast's warm, buttery light brings back vivid memories. The setting is the lavish Greenwich estate of my brother, the state of Connecticut. An enormous, deserted space that seems more like a museum than a private residence. Everything from sage stuffing to roasted turkey to the subtle sweetness of my mother's Chanel 55 is wafting through the air. Under the glare of a crystal chandelier, a lengthy mahogany table glistens with silverware so weighty it seems ceremonial. And Sterling is sitting at the head of the table. As he lifts a glass of amber, he stands majestic in his castle, adorned with a custom Tom Ford outfit and a PC Philippe watch that gleams, the Macallan 25 liquid. Of course. His gaze settles on me, his eyes are a chillier shade of blue than mine. Nothing matters, even though I'm dressed like a civilian. When he sees me, he sees a uniform. Silently, he grins. With a tone that betrays his condescending delight, he declares a toast. He points his glass in my direction. To our miniature colonel, who is still occupied with her federally funded airborne vehicles. Those words linger. He goes on, his voice booming, calling it an intentional strike. I absolutely love it as a hobby. Each of us ought to be, very goodness the public can afford to support our interests. A nasty, piercing sound reverberates through the vast room as his laughter echoes. Some of his business partners gently chuckle. An intense surge of humiliation and wrath causes my face to redden. In a quiet cry for help, my eyes dart to my mom. No, she doesn't. She remains still, her expression contorted into a mask of deference as she avoids making eye contact with me. Sterling, I implore you not to tease your sister. Her tone is light, an adoring celebration of her brilliant, my child. This is a total giving up. A painful, hard lump develops in my throat. There and then, I did not have the rank of colonel in the USAAF. I do not represent a lady who is in charge of a squadron and is accountable for the lives of hundreds of people. Even if I am sitting at this table with my own family, they don't notice me. I am only an ornament. My reverie is abruptly shattered as I am jolted back to the here and now by a hard knock on my office door. The memory's warm, smothering gold stands in sharp contrast to the cold, clinical white of my workplace, and I blink. I get to my feet and gait, as I walked silently over the linoleum floor to the window. Under the waning light, the C-17s sit resolutely on the flight line, their gray fuselages exuding an air of strength. They are my silent allies, my steel titans. This is where I live. An environment governed by rules, laws of physics, and outcomes. In this utopian society, self-control is not an afterthought but an essential condition for human survival. It's a realm that Sterling's wealth and power cannot alter. Inside of me, a new sensation is starting to form, icy, solid, unambiguous, and unmoving. A new beginning awaits us this time. He thinks it's our family responsibility, but I refuse to take his poison. Even if my mother remains silent, it won't make me helpless. Here he comes. He is leaving his realm of custom clothes and theoretical profits to enter my safe haven of flying suits and tangible reality. The regulations are written here. In this area, my power is tangible. My father, a decorated army colonel, is the only one who has ever fully comprehended, and I think of him often. He took notice of my passion rather than my gender. A Sterling was transformed his funeral into a business eulogy, turning his life of service into a mere footnote. In my imagination, a solemn, icy promise takes shape. No way, Sterling. It is not going to happen here. You will not make fun of my family's history or my father's legacy. Within my home, no. In my office, I had clung to my father's memory, which had both positive and negative aspects. It served as both my steadfastness and the key that opened a vault of sorrow. There was more than just the Thanksgiving table humor. All it took was the most recent blot on an otherwise carefully documented record of contempt. Every entry on the map of my insignificance that my brother Sterling had been making for years had been like a new scar covering my heart. A Christmas a few years ago keeps popping into my head. The Connecticut home was oppressively tense, rather than filled with holiday spirit. That night, Sterling had a string of successes. He had made the absurd comparison between my C-17 and an Amazon delivery truck, minus the fuel efficiency, and had been thinking aloud about whether a membership at his golf club would be within my financial means, thanks to my pension. The most stinging remark that night wasn't delivered by him, though I had become emotionally distant and tolerant of his verbal attacks over the years. Tori, his daughter, is my niece. At 16 years old, my niece didn't understand my life in the military. To her, it seemed outdated. I sat on the velvet couch, trying to blend in as much as possible, when I noticed the familiar light from her phone. She was cursing wildly across the screen while trying to control her laughter. Additionally, she swiveled the phone so that it was facing me. I looked down at the screen and saw a TikTok filter that had turned my face into a comical distortion. A silly grin had contorted my normally grave face. I was bobbing my head irrationally to the beat of a cheesy military march. My aunt playing war while my dad runs the actual world. The description appeared across the video in bright pink letters. Sterling let out a roaring laugh, a booming, triumphant sound that dominated the room, the whole space. It sounded like approval, like triumph. "That's my girl," he pronounced with a cackle. My mother was my final source of protection, and I glanced at her. With a subtle, weary grin on her face, she merely shook her head. With barely audible words, she whispered, "Oh, Tori," without rebuke or consequence. The sound was one of capitulation. I stepped out into the groomed garden's chilly air, stepping away from the shame that was consuming me, and I had to apologize. I inhaled sharply, every breath a white cloud in the pitch black, fighting back the tears. I keep that memory locked away in the depths of my mind, but it pales in contrast to the one that actually broke me. On a dreary, chilly November day, at Arlington National Cemetery, interminable lines of white tombstones stood rigidly in place. Keeping the nation's spirit safe is a silent army. The stiff fabric of my Air Force dress uniform provided some protection from the overwhelming anguish that was consuming me, but it was not enough. I stood rigidly upright, in isolation. I was attending my father's funeral. A hero was laid to rest. It was expected that Sterling would offer the eulogy. As the chief executive officer delivering the quarterly report, he stood at the lectern. He was not a heartbroken son. He framed his description of Dad's desire and perseverance in terms of corporate achievement. The line that broke the holy silence followed. Results, not processes, were what my dad grasped. As we both stood in the tiny crowd, Sterling looked directly at me and whispered, "The only thing that matters is the amount you leave on the balance sheet," and he was aware of this. Life. I could feel the veins in my face dripping dry. Rather than honoring our patriotic father, he was using him as a corporate case study. Desecrating his memory on sacred ground was what he was doing. The ritual was complete. The muted boom of gunfire resounded. My father's military unit's honor guard carefully rolled up the American flag. I was shown the tightly folded triangle of stars and stripes by the sergeant, whose face wore a mask of solemn duty. The country's last expression of gratitude. Sacred trust was bestowed upon me, a pair of hands. I looked across at Sterling as I shook my hands and took it. He turned his head away from the flag. As he stared at me, the subtlest, most disdainful sneer appeared on his face. It was taken by him. He had taken away the last holy moment I had with my dad and devalued his honorable life. I returned to the house that night and made an effort to overcome my wall of denial. The perfume of freshly cut flowers hung heavy in the air. In a robotic fashion, my mom was rearranging the bouquets of condolence. Pivoting away from me. "Mom," I began, my voice rising, strained. In his insult to Dad, he said, "Did you hear what he said at the funeral?" Her head remained fixed forward. An emerald ribbon was the object of her incessant fiddling. "Nellie, please," she moaned. "Sterling is just practical. He has the entire family business on his shoulders now. You shouldn't be so sensitive. Don't be so sensitive." The words were a final swift blow to the heart. They went beyond simply excusing Sterling's heinous actions. They disregarded my loss. I was informed that my discomfort was the issue. I had a defect in my affection for my dad and my respect for his selfless life. I just want to know how many of you have ever had your whole life and your worst sorrow swept away by those same words. In the stillness of the room adorned with flowers, I came to a realization. On my nightstand in California sat Nee Brown's Daring Greatly, a book that a friend had given me, unread. I was unprepared to show my vulnerability. For my own value, I was preoccupied with making it through this family and this conflict. It was completely and totally on my own. The only person who had seen me, my father, had also disappeared. Now it was just me to protect his legacy. A reputation that my ancestors were hell-bent on destroying. It was an isolating journey being the only one responsible for carrying on my father's legacy. It was a road filled with the jagged, uneven gravel of responsibility rather than the smooth cobblestones of my brother's beloved prosperity. My career was viewed by Sterling as a state-funded hobby, an adventure. The burden I was carrying, which had seemed its worst when I was going through 2005 in the midst of New Orleans's dark, debris-filled skies. Recollection is more of a gradual weariness than a sudden flashback. The ghostly pain in my bones is a result of flying for 18 hours straight. The constant sound of the C-17's engines permeating my entire being. There wasn't the same vivid blue sky over Louisiana as there was over California. A perpetual dusk fell over a metropolis engulfed in its own misery, casting a wounded and sickly gray hue. Neither cargo pallets nor Humvees were on board my plane. People were being carried by it, folks who were drowning in their misery and who all had the same hollow thousand-why expression on their faces. The cargo compartment, which usually smells like metal and jet fuel, was heavy with the odor of wet clothing, stagnant water, and an innate, oppressive terror. We touched down on temporary runways, which were cleared just enough for the Globe Master, a gigantic aircraft, to land and take off again. There was no time for coffee in the break room or relaxing pre-flight inspections. A mad dash against the clock, and infection and hopelessness ensued. Every takeoff was triumphant. Out of hell emerged a tiny band of humans. Sterling had different ideas about this war game. It was a race against anarchy, and time was of the essence. It was the weight of duty, a notion as alien to my sibling as modesty. The load nearly became too much to handle one night. The cargo bay was shrouded in peaceful darkness when the late flight departed from Louis Armstrong Airport. The cabin was crowded with stretchers since we were conducting a medical evacuation. One of the old ladies was wearing a visage that resembled a roadmap from A Tough Life. She was too weak, despite our best efforts and the medic's arduous labor. Subtly giving in to her feelings of sadness and weariness, keep as is, or soften to, she passed peacefully mid-flight, a moment that left the entire crew in solemn silence. A human life has been taken from this world while I was in charge. It was as if my entire aircraft were burdened by the weight of that one silent death. A little later that night, crammed into a makeshift tent on an abandoned plot, I attempted to bridge the gap between Sterling's world and mine using concrete, the whine of generators, a constant companion. I got on my computer and began to compose an email to him. In a last-ditch effort to clarify, my fingers raced over the keyboard. I documented the last expression on that elderly woman's face as her eyelids closed for the final time. The devastating powerlessness of watching a life go through your fingers is something I wrote about. The deep, scary stillness in a cabin teeming with individuals following the permanent loss of a loved one. In order to release my pain and weariness, I wrote and wrote. As a result, I halted. For a moment, I considered pressing the send button. I don't see the point. For a man whose entire existence is predicated on quarterly profits and stock prices, how is it possible for him to comprehend a loss devoid of monetary significance? A currency based on duty and sacrifice, how could he understand it? I ripped out the whole draft, every last phrase that hurt. I checked my inbox right before I shut my laptop. One new message was there. He was the one communicating with it. The experience was just a brief note of triumph. Bragging about a profitable logistics contract that Stratford Global had recently won, taking advantage of the same mayhem that was engulfing the Gulf Coast. His initial reaction upon seeing a catastrophe was one of financial gain. All I could think about as I witnessed the tragedy was the people involved. It wasn't merely that we were novel. Our species was distinct from one another. Now that I'm back at my office at Travis, something is clear thanks to Katrina. My rule-based society is laughed at by Sterling. He considers them to be meaningless red tape, hurdles that need to be twisted or shattered. However, those very regulations were my sanity preservers amidst the total mayhem of New Orleans. Everything from the protocols to the checklists to the command structure. Those weren't shackles. A steel structure was what they were. They served as the framework that kept our world afloat while all else crumbled. Their presence separated a rescue mission from a terrified crowd. Sterling thought regulations were lacking. I could feel my strength emanating from them. During that instant of insight, a changed attitude washes over me. A statement made by General Norman Schwarzkopf comes to mind. Someone once told me that being a genuine leader is a huge burden. With a straight back and a stony concentration, I sit down at my desk, putting my weariness behind me. On my computer, I access the rules and regulations of the Department of Defense, particularly those that pertain to the transportation of civilian VIPs by military planes. Paragraph after paragraph, my eyes skim the thick words. I studied up on safety measures, background checks, and how-to requirements. I take in every word and every area. Not out of rage, but from a profound and resonant realization of my own strength, a strategy takes shape. Sterling mistook my reality for a video game. Fine. My game had rules, and he was about to find out that there are no exceptions if he wanted to play on my field. My decision to impose military rules on my own brother hit me like a ton of bricks. This went beyond settling a debate. It was all about protecting my universe. A leader is meaningless to me if they don't, the group she leads. An impromptu meeting was convened the next morning by myself. The two individuals who entered my office formed the foundation of my command. Veteran Mexican-American Airman Chief Master Sergeant Chief Diego Ramirez had a placid exterior that belied his intense devotion to his unit. Because he had been in the Air Force for longer than I had, he had witnessed more than I had. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Jade Lynn, an intelligent and perceptive flight engineer of Asian heritage, stood at his side. A young woman with the knowledge of an old soul, yet young enough to be my daughter. They had been my correct, outstretched arms. I was careful to keep my briefing brief and emotionless. I refrained from informing them about the desecrated funeral or the years of ridicule. That wasn't necessary. All I did was lay forth the facts. I announced in a businesslike manner that we were expecting a civilian VIP for a familiarization flight. You may call him Cole Stratford. He holds the esteemed position as Chief Executive Officer for a logistics company. For a second, I let the name linger in the air before continuing. Complete conformity to protocol is required for its execution. Nothing rushed, nothing spectacular, every pore marked, with each cup of tea. Do you understand? Rico, my 5-year subordinate, looked at me knowingly. Even for a standard briefing, he could tell that I was nervous by my tense body language and the steely tone of my voice. He perceived the woman through the rank and terminology. Absolutely crystal clear, Colonel, he said, his voice maintaining a deep, steady growl. We will ensure that our residence is respected by everyone. He gave the word house a subtle emphasis that let me know he got it. It wasn't only this base and this squadron, a business. Our home was there. We found solace there. Rico departed after the meeting, but Evie paused at the door. Colonel, she inquired, her countenance grave. The green light to talk freely? Sure thing, Sergeant. She cautiously re-entered the room. Last night, I read a little bit about Stratford Global, ma'am. Return on investment is the foundation of their whole organizational culture. All things are measured by them. She inhaled deeply. Her stare is fixed and unblinking. Our return on investment is evaluated, I only wanted to mention it, with the goal of rescuing refugees. It's a measure of how many service members have made it back to their families. Plus, you should never believe someone who says that metric has a monetary value. Her remarks were as refreshing as a desert drink. I had never before heard the gap between Sterling's world and mine described so precisely and with such breathtaking clarity. Someone got it. A sincere grin, my first in days, peeled through my meticulously put-together exterior. I observed more than simply an employee, nonetheless, a fellow traveler. Even when I said, "Thank you, Jade," I felt like my words were completely falling short. That means more than you know. Later that night, Rico texted, "Diner 1900, my treat." I met him and Jade at a classic American diner just outside the base in Fairfield. It was a place frozen in time with red vinyl booths, a chrome-edged counter, and a jukebox in the corner playing old rock and roll hits. The air smelled of sizzling burgers and freshly brewed coffee. It was quite a contrast to in the frigid, quiet splendor of my brother's estate. We slid into a booth, the three of us in our civilian attire. And for an hour, we forgot we were a colonel and her sergeants. We were simply Nell, Rico, and Jade. We spoke about everything and nothing. Rico showed us pictures of his daughter's first soccer game with pride. Jade went absolutely nuts over a new avionics diagnostic she was working on. They asked me about my former flight instructor, and we laughed till our sides hurt. As we nursed our wounds, chocolate milkshakes, I felt a comforting warmth radiate from within that was unrelated to the greasy, mouth-watering burger that had just entered my lungs. Rather, it was the comfort of acceptance, of belonging in this bustling, unassuming diner. I wasn't being evaluated or assessed, I was simply seen. This was family, not the kind you're born into, but the kind you create, the kind formed through common goals and mutual regard. The contrast was a physical ache. My biological family offered me judgment through a crystal glass, while my chosen family offered me loyalty through a paper placemat. As we rose to depart, Rico placed a delicate hand on my arm, his countenance taking on a more solemn tone. "Colonel," he murmured softly, his voice brimming with a fierce protective loyalty. "No matter what happens tomorrow, you're not alone. We've got your back." It was more than a promise, it was an oath, a declaration of allegiance that Sterling's wealth could never purchase. It served as a shield. As I stepped out into the chilly California night, I felt more empowered and ready than I had in years past. I knew I could rely on them, and I knew I would need them the following day. The sound of approaching engines broke the serenity of our diner dinner. However, it wasn't the reassuring roar of AC-17, rather, it was the haughty, conceited whine of a private jet. Sterling had finally arrived. As I gazed out my office window, I watched his Gulfstream G650 taxi down the runway. It was a striking white predator among my herd of gray utilitarian giants, seemingly out of place, a symbol of. He stepped out of the ramp like a corporate emperor, dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit and sporting a pair of Cell sunglasses that concealed his eyes but not his smirk. Two young men in matching suits trailed behind him, holding briefcases like loyal foot soldiers. He crossed the tarmac like a new owner conducting an inspection, not like a guest. He nodded to the young airman who saluted him in a dismissive, regal manner, a gesture that Rico, Jade, and I were in the officers' club, a place of respect and camaraderie, waiting for him. Sterling strode in, his eyes scanning the room, the polished wood bar, and the squadron plaques on the wall. He didn't offer a handshake, instead pausing in the middle of the room to remove his sunglasses. "Well," he said, his voice barely audible over the few other officers present, "this is all basic defense budget cuts, I suppose." The insult hit me like a punch, a subtle poison released into the air. It wasn't directed at me specifically, but at my entire world and everyone in it. Rico tensed up next to me as Sterling strode to the bar, ordered a Perrier with lime, turned to face us, and began lecturing with a smooth, condescending voice. "You have an impressive operation here, Nellie, a well-oiled machine." He clutched a drink. "But how much does it cost to fly an hour? Do you even keep track of key performance indicators?" Then he had the gall to look down on my team. "You too," he said, making a nebulous gesture with his glass toward Rico and Jade. "You're the implementers. In my world, it's math, plain and simple." The room went silent as tension rose in the room, and I was about to speak up when Jade stepped forward, her voice filled with determination, her back rigidly straight. "Sir," she said, her voice polite but firm. "Really, the number of lives we save is the best indicator of our return on investment. That's a hard number to fit onto one of your spreadsheets." Sterling's face contorted into a scowl. He wasn't used to being challenged, particularly by someone he viewed as an ordinary official. Rico's low, steady voice broke the silence. "Colonel Sharp is responsible for hundreds of human lives, individuals' lives and the nation's wealth in jeopardy." "Mr. Stratford," he exclaimed, his gaze unwavering. "That's not middle management. That's command." Sterling was momentarily rendered speechless by my team's 1-2 punch. His face turned red with anger as he turned to face me, his intended target. "You allowed your staff to treat me that way, Nellie?" he hissed, the word staff laced with venom. That was it. The tide of my anger crested. I remembered my father's words, a quiet echo in my mind. "Son, you can buy the globe, but honesty is priceless." As my voice froze into a serene silence, I locked eyes with Sterling's raging stare. "Sterling is home to non-commissioned officers who serve in the U.S. Air Force and are telling it like it is. I purposefully moved closer to you by taking a step forward." A change occurred in the room's dynamics. It had escalated beyond a simple family quarrel. A confrontation ensued. I said, with great care, that you are on a federal military facility. You are expected to act appropriately as a visitor, in that regard. Now I was almost there. His eyes betrayed a hint of incredulity. He had no idea what to do as he was spiraling out of control. I laid out my ground rules and my plane in a way that left no space for compromise. You will faithfully execute all directives given to you by me or my staff. And that is a rule. I purposefully let the space between us to grow longer so that he could fully comprehend my order. Is that clear? On the flight line the following morning, tension and coldness prevailed. A calm and collected gray beast, the C-17 waited patiently. Verified its systems, the crew is all set. My group. Every step of the way, they were punctual, diligent, and expert. All we had to wait for was one individual and their entourage. They were tardy by 15 minutes. They took their time. As leisurely as a Sunday stroll in a park, they made their way over the asphalt. With a big Starbucks mug in each hand, they stood. Nobody seemed to care that they had kept a whole military flight crew waiting, and there was certainly no sign of remorse. To his trademark flourish, Sterling smacked the enormous fuselage of the aircraft using the clenched fist. Sure thing, Nellie. Let's start the concert. Every second counts, my friend. My look was unintelligible as I stood there with my clipboard. Forgot to even glance up. Sterling, you're running behind schedule, and the restricted area of the flight lines does not permit food or drink. My tone was one of straightforward assertion. A brief barking chuckle escaped him. Oh my goodness. Sister, loosen up a bit. Coffee is all it is. Then, with utter disinterest, he withdrew his handheld electronic device. He swiveled around to face the enormous C-17 tail as he raised his phone to take a selfie, ignoring me entirely. A fuse was lit inside of me by that one haughty deed. There is a constant threat of harm on the flight line. It is not only illegal to use a personal electronic device. It shows complete and utter lack of concern for the well-being of any individual in the room. Immediately, Diego Ramirez took action. With a controlled but powerful voice, he walked 3 long paces beside Sterling. Excuse me, but I require that you install the. Please put your phone down. This is a restricted area. Sterling waved his hand dismissively, ignoring him as he continued to search for the ideal angle on his screen. Just taking a quick pic, Sergeant. No need to overreact. I couldn't take it anymore. Years of being dismissed culminated in that moment where I finally stood firm. My boots made a harsh rhythmic sound as I strode towards him, patter on the hard surface. Despite the howling wind on the asphalt, my frigid, crystal-clear voice could be heard by every member of the team. Stratford Sterling. His conceited self-expression persisted as he cautiously spun around. Put away that technological device, I'm telling you straight up. You have received your last warning. With an irate twinkle in his eye, he fixed his gaze on me. Instead of a colonel, he saw his younger sister. Instead of a leader who needed to be obeyed, he perceived a familial dynamic that could be used. He made a calculated move by lifting his chin, boldly confront my folks with a challenge. I don't know, Nell. Sneering, he cast a wicked eye. Your older brother is going to get an order from you. An essential principle from my time as an officer training school came crashing into my head at that same moment. A commander's willingness to make tough judgments is crucial, particularly when those decisions are not popular. You can't afford to be hesitant. Immediately, all doubts or concerns were eliminated. The years of repressing my feelings, of maintaining harmony, of playing the victim, they all burned away, leaving behind the icy, unyielding confidence in my authority. I had graduated from being his little sister. Colonel Sharp was my name. I ignored Sterling's disbelief and turned to the sergeants, shouting, "Security," with an authority that Sterling had never before heard from me. 2 airmen in uniform from the security forces who had been standing by quickly rose to their feet and were by my side. Mr. Stratford has defied a direct order and violated serious safety protocols on an active flight line. My voice was cold and commanding. You must immediately remove him and his entourage from the restricted area. The VIP flight has been cancelled. The entire flight line fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the sound of the wind. My crew members' expressions ranged from shock to growing respect. Sterling stood motionless, his jaw slack and smirk gone. You wouldn't dare," he stammered, his voice a disbelieving whisper. I finally looked him in the eyes, my gaze fixed on him. The words "get out" escaped me as swiftly as they had escaped Sterling's pricey shoes as the storm rolled in, bringing with it political pressure and a barrage of phone calls. My brother, used to getting his way, wasted no time turning his influence into a weapon. The first call came from a two-star general at the Pentagon, a man whose name is known to many for having pushed others too far. A congressman's aide called, his tone more demanding, discussing the need to forge relationships with the business community. By noon, some sleazy internet tabloids, the type that thrive on controversy and outrage, had published stories with titles like, "Power-Tripping Colonel Ground's Tycoon Brother." I managed to stay calm through it all. Sterling was on his list of political contributors. In the midst of the storm he had sparked, I stood as a paragon of unsettling calm, repeating to each caller the same thing: there was a serious breach of safety protocol. A full incident report is being completed and will be sent up the proper chain of command. I was certain that I had acted appropriately, but I also knew that defending my actions wouldn't be sufficient. I summoned Jade Lynn to my office that afternoon. Rico stood watch outside to make sure nobody would disturb us. "Evie," I said, my voice low and focused. "I need you to retrieve the visitor access and security clearance paperwork for Cole Stratford and his whole team." "On it, Colonel," she exclaimed, her fingers already flitting across the keyboard, for each form they had to fill out. Regarding the subsequent, for an hour while I cross-referenced digital data, the sole sound being the soft click of keys and the rustle of paper. We skimmed over the standard information, such as names, DOBs, and SSNs, finding even a single grain of sand on such a huge beach seemed like an eternity. When Jade abruptly tensed up, my vision began to blur. "Hold on a second," she murmured, drawing nearer to her screen. She then referred to a specific line item on Sterling's security application and said, "Cannell, take a look at this. Questionnaire for non-sensitive positions, Standard Government Form SF-85. Anyone visiting the base as a civilian who needed unaccompanied access had to fill out this form. Pronounce Section 7BE. Have you traveled outside the United States in the last 5 years? It asks, and Sterling's response appears on the screen in the clear digital file. He had made sure to mark the box. Evie turned in her chair, a fresh window popping up on her computer screen. He confirmed. "No," she firmly stated, her voice betraying a dreadful sense of excitement. "However, I accomplished A. I conducted a brief search earlier today and came up with the following. Cole Stratford was the keynote speaker at the Global Economic Forum in Dubai 3 months ago." With a click of her finger, my screen was flooded with high-resolution photographs from articles. I gazed at the two displays side by side, and the lie was there. This story is fictional and inspired by composite characters, with the sparkling Dubai cityscape behind him. There was no space for error, no ambiguity. He hadn't accidentally forgotten a trip. He had willfully lied on a federal document. A felony, and the truth. A slow, icy thrill, like a hunter's when prey steps into the crosshairs, coursed through me. My heart raced, not from fear, but from a frigid, thrilling certainty. This was it. This was the silver bullet. The situation had transformed from a chaotic family drama. It wasn't about his wounded pride or my hurt feelings, it was about the law. Sterling, ever confident and self-assured, believed that the rules, the small regulations that govern everyone else, simply didn't apply to him. He thought he was exempt from their authority. I calmly instructed Jade to print everything. The SF-85 form with the false declaration, the news articles, and the high-resolution photos. I took the neat stack of papers, squared them, and read my father's favorite Bible verse, "Pride goeth before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall." Sterling's pride, his absolute conviction in his own untouchability, was his Achilles heel, and I had just found the arrow. I made sure they were perfectly sealed and placed them in a clean manila folder. Taking a quick glance at Evie and Rico, who had just returned inside, we all seemed to understand each other. "Thank you both," I said, my voice steady. "I'll take it from here." That night, I stayed up all night. I sat at my kitchen table, the folder in front of me, with a single lamp shining a light on the evidence. I plotted my next move with the same level of accuracy as when flying through enemy territory. The battle was fierce. War had just begun and would continue until the end. I had made up my mind that the truth would be my weapon, and I would fight it according to my own terms. In the middle of the night, I had a quiet question: was I really ready to attack my own family? The answer to this question came the following afternoon when Sterling, furious and unable to accept, confronted me. He decided to escalate after being thwarted and decided that he would try to execute me publicly rather than engage in back-channel negotiations with influential friends. He convened a press conference, not in a sterile boardroom but in the Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont San Francisco, a historic hotel at the top of Nob Hill that exuded the old-world luxury and power that he admired. He invited every major news outlet in the Bay Area and beyond, and he was constructing his personal platform, a glittering framework where he planned to shamelessly suspend my career while portraying himself as the helpless victim and me as the insane antagonist. I was well informed about all the details because his public relations team had ensured that I received the press release. Their goal was to render me immobile, so I could sit in my office and observe my own downfall on live television. They grossly underestimated me. I monitored the stream from a laptop in a waiting town car just a block from the hotel. I witnessed him ascend the stage, supported by a dozen or more audience members. As he addressed the crowd of microphones, his voice was as smooth as silk and his expression was one of calculated patriotism. He appeared solemn, his brows furrowed in apparent concern, and his words carried an air of artificial empathy. "I stand before you today with a heavy heart," he started, his voice betraying no trace of emotion. "Sloan Mercer, my sister, is a decorated officer and a woman I greatly respect." He halted, allowing the falsehood to permeate the atmosphere like a toxic scent. "However, she has been abusing her substantial influence, apparently as a result of a small, private family dispute." In a moving portrayal of a brother grieving, he shook his head in sorrow. "I am not here today because I am angry, but because I am very worried that her decisions, given that she is in charge of important national assets, may be influenced by her emotions rather than her professional responsibilities." What a genius he was. His presence was toxic. He was engrossed in attempting to ruin my professional life, my reputation, and my entire existence, under the banner of a concerned and caring sibling or brother. I was being portrayed by him as a lady who was emotionally unstable. A dated and unpleasant strategy that has been employed to undermine powerful women for as long as anybody can remember. As he prepared to invite questions in an effort to solidify his meticulously crafted story in the public consciousness, the double doors at the rear of the ballroom swung open. I strolled right in. The room was suddenly and completely silent. The huddle of reporters who had been leaning in close, taking notes, and recording, were suddenly become one. Everyone took a deep breath all at once, replacing the cacophony of rhythmic, disorganized camera clicks. In that vast, elaborate space, every single focus turned to me, from him. On the huge screens that flanked the stage, I could make out Sterling's face. I observed his jaw relax. His once confident, healthy tan appeared to fade away, leaving him with a sickly white complexion. The worried patriarch, who was also the head of the company, disappeared. A man stood in his stead, peering, to a specter. I was dressed as a full-time military officer. I stand here with my dark blue jacket neatly ironed, silver insignia shining on my shoulders, and a solid block of color over my heart, my combination ribbons. I was not the younger sister, Sloan Mercer. Now that I was off the defense, I was Colonel Sharp in the U.S. Air Force. My steps were slow and steady as I made my way down the center aisle, the thick, velvety carpet dampening the sound of my shoes. With my head held high, I climbed the few stairs as I passed the rows of shocked reporters, rises to the platform. I avoided meeting my brother's gaze. His presence was unnoticed by me. I ignored him like a piece of furniture and went straight to the podium, where I stood beside him. I dipped my head toward the recorders. My voice was quiet, clear, and magnified when I spoke, "Good afternoon," in the otherwise silent golden room. I did not raise my voice. "My name is Sloan Mercer, and I am here to give you the complete and essential background on what happened yesterday at Travis Air Force Base. My authority caused the cancellation of Mr. Cole Stratford's VIP flight. I continued by looking at the journalists' faces and meeting their gazes one by one. The cancellation was due to a serious and non-negotiable security concern. I paused to let those words sink in, leaving a space that I was about to fill with the truth. Mr. Stratford had lied on his official government documents. A flurry of frantic whispers resounded throughout the room as reporters frantically typed on their laptops, the sound resembling a sudden downpour. I nodded slightly towards the side of the stage. On cue, Staff Sergeant Jade Lynn, who was also dressed impeccably, came forward from the wings and, with a few keystrokes on a laptop, brought the document up to date. Bringing the evidence to life, a new image appeared on the two large screens that had previously shown Sterling's worried face. It was a high-resolution scan of his SF-85 form. In Section 7B, it was clearly checked that he had traveled abroad. Then the image split in half, showing a photograph from a prominent business publication next to the damning form. Sterling was shown smiling broadly, shaking hands on a stage in Dubai just 3 months ago. The iconic burgle Arab in the background. I concluded with a voice as sharp and clean as a blade, and the truth is not an optional extra for those who believe they are above the rules. I acted in accordance with the law and my sworn oath to protect the assets and personnel under my command. I looked out at the sea of stunned faces, then turned my head slightly, finally allowing the ballroom to gasp in unison. It was irrefutable, absolute, and the end. I forced myself to look at my brother, who stood motionless under the punishing light of the television cameras. His once mighty empire was crumbling before his eyes, and I looked around the room to see if anyone had any questions. I didn't hear any champagne popping or celebrations following the press conference. Instead, I felt a crushing fatigue, like the emptiness that follows a fight, no matter how triumphant. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving behind a void that was devoid of sound and emotion. That night, as I sat in my peaceful apartment off base, an email from him. I had one, but at the cost of an irreparable break with my own family. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. News channels replayed my presentation clip endlessly. Stratford Global's stock price dropped. The DOJ announced an investigation into Sterling for making false statements on a federal document. His empire, which he had built on bullying and intimidation, was starting to crumble. Arrived. I carefully opened it, my hand steady. Inside was a lengthy, meandering message, a masterclass in manipulative self-pity. It started with, "I'm sorry." However, that sentiment didn't endure. The following paragraph placed full blame on me. "I'm sorry that you felt the need to push things this far," he wrote. "This was a private matter that we could have handled quietly by not turning it into a public spectacle. You have devastated this family. You have ruined everything." As I read the words, I couldn't help but feel a surge of emotions. For the first time, they weren't painful. The old sting of his disapproval and rejection had faded. All that remained was a cold, clinical sympathy. He still didn't understand. He never would. He viewed family as a crutch, not a bond to be respected. He interpreted my actions as a personal attack, not a defense of my father's honor and my own integrity. I chose not to respond because I was at a loss for words. Instead, I made a new folder in my email client, called it Evidence, and copied his. I typed a message into it and closed my laptop. A boundary had been drawn, not out of anger but in a peaceful final clarity. On a small, polished wooden shelf in my living room sits the American flag from my father's funeral, folded into its tight, perfect triangle. I went over and ran my fingers over the clean linen, feeling the embroidered stars hard beneath my fingertips. This was his legacy, not the bottom line that Sterling mentioned, but a quiet, unwavering commitment to honor and truth. I had protected it, and in doing so, I had finally claimed it. Declaring it as my own, I felt my victory was incomplete because I couldn't let go of the ghosts of the past. Reaching into my desk, I found an old worn journal. Inside, I found the letter I had written to Sterling years ago, from a dusty tent in post-Katrina, New Orleans. The unsent email I had copied onto paper, a desperate request for understanding from a younger, more vulnerable me. Reading it again, with words smudged where tears had once fallen, brought me back to the young woman who had. I carried the letter, a small metal wastebasket, and a lighter out onto my balcony. The cool night air of California swept over me. Under the vast starry sky, I set the corner of the paper on fire. I felt a wave of compassion for her, for the pain she had carried for so long. But I wasn't her anymore. I didn't need her validation. I had mine. She had written it. I released the ghost and set myself free. With the past behind me, I felt an urge to reach for the future. I picked up my phone and did something I had never dared before. I opened Instagram and found my niece Tori's profile. I thought about the scandal, about the angry, defensive messages she had written. I watched as the words curled into black ash, sentences full of pain and pleading. Then they turned into smoke and drifted away into the darkness. Sterling's cycle of blame and anger was something I wanted to break. I went to my window and picked up my combat boots, which were still covered in dust from the Travis flight line, and set them on the windowsill. The sky outside was ablaze with the deep purples and fiery oranges of a California sunset. I took a picture of the scene, with the worn boots in the foreground and the beautiful peaceful sky behind. I sent the photo to Kayla Whitaker as a direct message. No mention of her father or the press conference was made in the message, instead, a brief caption reading "This is the view from my office. Love you" was added. The intention was not to boast or challenge, but to invite. It was a quiet, hopeful attempt to break the cycle of contempt and demonstrate to the next generation that there was another kind of strength and legacy worth fighting for. I didn't know whether she would respond, but for the first time, I felt at peace. I had cleared my own runway. After a few months, the media frenzy died down, and Sterling's public image remained in shambles. He was mired in legal battles, his name a cautionary tale in the corporate world. I kept tabs on the news, but it didn't feel like my battle anymore. I had earned the only victory that mattered, the one that brought me peace. Today, I was back in the air, but this time it wasn't in the cockpit of AC-17. I was sitting in seat 12A on a commercial United Airlines flight from San Francisco to Hartford, Connecticut. Dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, I felt blissfully anonymous. Just another face in the crowd, another passenger finding their seat. And for the first time in years, that felt like freedom. The constant low-grade pressure to prove my worth, to justify my existence was gone. I was going to see my mother, but this time on my own terms. There were no demands, no expectations, no desperate need for her approval. I was just a daughter going to see her mother. As I handed my boarding pass to the flight attendant at JFK International Airport, I relaxed. The gate, she looked down at it, then up at me. Her businesslike smile turned into something more sincere. "Welcome aboard, Colonel Sharp," she said, her voice low but clear. "Thank you for your service." Her words, so plain and honest, coming from a total stranger, touched me deeply. They meant more than any grudging, backhanded praise I had ever gotten from my own family. In return, I grinned, a real, unburdened smile. "Thank you," I replied, "it's my honor." As we soared above the Bay Area's gray marine layer into the endless sunshine, I felt a weightlessness I hadn't known I'd been lacking. The chaotic and noisy world below seemed to recede into the distance, leaving us with nothing but the expansive sky above. The captain silenced the seatbelt sign, and a series of clicks resounded throughout the cabin. I reached for my phone, casually browsing through old messages, when suddenly it vibrated with a new one. My heart pounded a little. It was an Instagram notification from Tori. My thumb lingered over the icon. A brief moment of uncertainty, a flicker of my old frailty. I gathered my courage and opened the message. It wasn't an explanation, an apology, or a defense of her father. It was a screenshot of the photo I had sent her months ago. It showed my weathered combat boots on the window sill against the sunset, and beneath it was a simple 7-word question. "Those boots are so cool, Auntie. Where's your next flight?" A hopeful question broke the cycle of disregard that had defined my life for so long. A wave of emotion, warm and overwhelming, washed over me. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I stared at the words, reading them over and over. A question, a simple, genuine question. It wasn't about money, power, or status. It was about my life, my world. It was a flicker of curiosity, a glimmer of respect. It was the beginning of a bridge being built across a canyon of contempt I thought was impassable. My eyes welled up with tears, not from sorrow but from a deep sense of appreciation. Glancing out the window once more, I beheld the seemingly endless expanse of white clouds that stretched to the horizon. It appeared as a blank slate, a new beginning, and a real, unforced smile spread across my face. I no longer required Sterling's or my mother's approval. My value was not debatable, rather, it was forged in the cockpit of my plane, in the confidence of my crew, and in the strength of my own spine. I had endured the most. I had triumphed in the most crucial struggle of my life, the struggle for my very soul, not through violence but through honesty and integrity. My father's legacy was not wealth or possessions but rather a compass that had led me back to myself. A serene contemplation settled into my mind, as tranquil and clear as the sky outside my window. For a long time I had allowed my brother to tell my story, relegating me to the role of a minor protagonist in his epic narrative. Today, I took flight solo, and although my journey was far from over, I was determined to see it through. Still, I knew that my battle was far from done, but now I was on my own flight path, and the only thing I could see ahead was empty sky. My story ended here, but I know that many of you are still fighting your own battles, dealing with family issues, or fighting for respect. So, I ask, what does your open sky look like? What is the one boundary you need to set or truth you need to speak to begin flying your own story? Tell me what you think in the comments. If you found my story inspiring, I encourage you to subscribe to Chosen Revenge so you can read more tales of perseverance, self-sufficiency, and the dawning of a new day. Your journey is important,